Today we're going to be talking about Sumer, which is the first civilization in Mesopotamia. As we've already talked about before, Mesopotamia is the area located within the Fertile Crescent in between the Tigris and Euphrates River. The Fertile Crescent, as we already know, stretches from the Mediterranean Sea in the west all the way to the Persian Gulf in the east. Sumer, specifically, is located in the southern part of the Fertile Crescent, closest to the Persian Gulf. So you can see it here outlined in the green, and here are some of the city-states. So like I said, Sumer was the first civilization in Mesopotamia, and it began around 3500 BC or BCE. Like I said, it was located in the southern part of the Fertile Crescent, and that made it really great for fishing and trading. Now, Sumer did not have a single unified government, so it wasn't like today in the United States where the president is in charge of all of the states. It was broken down into city-states, and each one of those city-states would have their own king, and that king would not be in charge of a different city-state. He would only be in charge of his own city-state. Now, it's important to know what a city-state is, and the definition for that is a self-governing unit including the city and its surrounding lands and settlement. So it'd be the city and the little villages and stuff that kind of floated around it. So these city-states were actually often at war with one another because they wanted to protect their land that they could grow their crops on. There were limited natural resources that they could use, and they wanted to protect their trade routes because that's what made them a lot of money. Now, all of this was possible because of a food surplus, and a food surplus is having more food than needed to just survive. Now they have extras that they can store away for a later date. They don't have to worry about getting their own food every day by hunting and gathering. They can grow their food, and they can grow enough of it that everyone has enough for now and tomorrow, and the next day, and as much as they could grow for. So, Sumer was able to create this food surplus because of irrigation systems and silt. An irrigation system is a man-made system that's used to water fields. So they were able to direct water and make it so those fields would get watered. Maybe this one got less water, this one got more water. And then silt is especially fine and fertile soil, which is perfect for farming. So, the Tigris and Euphrates River would flood every year, and eventually that water would recede back into the rivers, but what would be left was silt, and that was the perfect soil to farm for. So, even though they could grow a lot of these things and get their own resources, they couldn't grow and find everything. But what they were able to do was trade for anything that they still needed. Now, because of this food surplus, people had more time to learn new skills and to also go out and trade. So they did things like make metal tools, they made new art forms, like as you can see over here, this carving. The population also grew rapidly. So now there was more and more people because they did have enough food to feed all these people. It's really hard to have a lot of people if you don't have food to feed them with. They're going to start to die off. But if you can feed them all, there's going to be more and more. Now, with all of these people, they needed a government to rule them, or it would be chaos. So the kings took charge of the city-states, and then below them were people called administrators who supervised things like taxes and kept order with laws and all of that. So, we kind of just touched on it there. But because of all these people, and it's because of the government, that a social structure started to develop. And a social structure is when you organize people into groups based on how much power they have and how much wealth they have. So you can see here that at the top would be the king, below him would be the priest, then those administrators we just talked about, as well as scribes, who are the people who write things down, merchants are the people who trade, and artisans are the people who make art and other useful things. Below that group would be the farmers who grew the food, and below them were the slaves who did not have their freedom. Now, as you can see here, there are definite definitions between each class, and things are not fair for everyone. People in these lower classes are not treated as well as people in these upper classes. They maybe did not have the same rights, or they would be punished harsher if they broke the law. People who maybe were priests could maybe get away with a little more. Things were not fair, and you're going to see that with pretty much any social structure we study in history. The people at the top are living pretty good lives, and the people at the bottom are having a much tougher time. So, in addition to all of this, they also developed a religion, and the religion in Sumer was polytheistic. Now, polytheistic means that they believed in many gods and goddesses, not just one. They actually believed in hundreds of them. On the other hand, monotheism, which is not what they were in Sumer, is the belief in one God. So that would be like Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Those are monotheistic religions. But Sumer was polytheistic because they had many gods and goddesses. The Sumerians believed that they were created to serve these gods and goddesses and keep them happy, because if they didn't keep them happy, they believed that the gods and goddesses could cause diseases, droughts, and really bad floods. One of the ways people tried to get in good favor of the gods and goddesses was to build votive statues. And they would leave these statues in the temple, and they believed while they would go out and, work and do whatever they needed to do, these little statues would be there and pray for them to be in the good favor of the gods and goddesses. Another way people wanted to keep their gods and goddesses happy were by practicing rituals, like offering the temple tax to the gods, which were just little offerings of like food or money or goods. And a ritual is a formal series of acts always performed in the same way. So they would always do like the same steps in order to offer something to the gods. Now, where they were doing this was called a ziggurat. And a ziggurat was a religious temple. So kind of like a church or a mosque or a temple or anywhere that you go to do religious services, the Sumerians went to ziggurats. And each city-state dedicated their ziggurat to a specific god or goddess that they believed lived there and was also like the protector of their city-state. Now, they built these ziggurats in the middle of the cities, and priests conducted the rituals and other practices there. Now, it was in the middle of the city because religion is really important to the Sumerians, and they put the most important things in the middle of the city. That way everyone can get there. So at the middle of the city was the ziggurat. Here are some pictures of the ziggurats for you to take a look at. We have some drawings as well as actual ruins that exist today. Let you take a look at that for a second. Alright, moving on. Finally, one of the most important things to know about the Sumerians is that they created the first form of writing called cuneiform. And this is so important because now we're going to see as history goes on, people are going to start writing, and it is much easier to know about people if they write things down. Now, some people, they pass down their history by stories and by word of mouth, and that's really great, and we can learn a lot of things from that, but the most concrete evidence we can find is writing. And the Sumerians created cuneiform, and the symbols originally represented objects, like it would be like this symbol represents water, and this symbol represents the sun. But over time, the symbols evolved to represent sounds, kind of like our letters represent sounds today, like A is ah, and M is and N is So that allowed them to make the language more complex, and they could write more and more things down. Now, the people doing this writing were called scribes, and they would go to school for 12 years to learn how to read and write cuneiform. Not everyone knew how to read and write in Sumer. It was a really hard process, and it took a really long time. Not everyone could afford to go to school for 12 years to become a scribe. Some people had to work in the field, some people were artists, some people were merchants. Not everyone was going to learn how to read and write. But the scribe's job was to write down religious practices, scientific works, laws, and stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, like we learned about the other day. All of these things are things that we can study today to learn about the Sumerians. And that's really important if we want to try and understand who they were as a people. Now, the scribes did this writing by using reeds that they would press into clay tablets. There was no pen and paper back at this time. You can see up here some examples of those clay tablets. Alright, that's all we've got for today on Sumer.